All right, welcome back. We are going to now jump into networking once again, focusing on networking security this time, and I'm going to turn it over to Ian Joliffe to lead this discussion.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Hopefully my audio is working okay and everybody can hear me. Welcome to the networking security discussion this morning. Really happy to be here, see a lot of people I do know, a lot of new names and people I'm looking forward to getting to know this morning. Welcome everybody from good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Certainly a very diverse and talented group of people on the call today. I did prepare a little bit of an introduction here to try and get the conversation going, and there's been some other good contributions on the Etherpad already. I tend to, what I thought I would do is just start by the introduction, and then we can jump around the Etherpad as the conversation evolves this morning. So, if we really think about the theme that the foundation is set up as part of OpenDev, we're really continuing the theme of automation in this session, but really with a focus on networking security and how it relates to hardware and automation. So those are the kinds of topics that I'm looking to draw out of the conversation today. How do we expose new challenges and new learnings and new opportunities for the community as we move some of the things that used to be driven in proprietary boxes, but now those same policies and security capabilities need to be part of open source projects. So I think that's a very interesting area that we need to evolve. Also, how do we ensure what we deploy on day zero remains aligned with the security policies of the enterprise from day one to day X? I think that's a very interesting challenge, and I know one that many companies struggle with today. And another interesting angle I thought we could explore is in a increasingly DevOps world, how do we operationalize the workflow from the developer through to operations and making sure that the networking security remains comprehensive across the network and aligned with policies. So those were my opening remarks. Certainly, if there's other topics that people want to double click on, and please add them to the Etherpad. Again, I've got a separate window here going on my computer so that I can scroll down the Etherpad. I will also call out line items to keep us aligned on where we are in the conversation. And if we get some controversy or good debate going, maybe we'll even throw in a poll to see how we can draw everybody into the conversation and have an opportunity to contribute what they're seeing in the trends in the industry as well. So with that, let's start at line 293. What are some of the automation tools that people are using for network security, and then more specifically for port configuring and filtering?
Do you mean port in like networking fabric, or do you mean port as in virtual port?
Well, I think, yeah, I think that's a great question. So, it could be the physical port, it could be the virtual ports. Maybe let's start with what are some of the higher level tools that people are using for security in a networking context.
We have a ton of automation with this stuff, but it's all some custom internal tooling.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, I've seen a certain trend for people, I hate using a buzzword, but like the zero trust kind of model.
Right.
where they kind of assume outside the box there be dragons, basically, and then try and secure everything as if it were on the public internet directly, effectively.
Right.
Using tooling that deals with that. Which is convenient for the case that I wrote on 301, where I'm using ironic driver that doesn't do any security as such, beyond VLAN segregation.
Great. Thanks, John.
Is it that, John, is it the port doesn't, I mean, the driver doesn't know how to convey the security group to the switch port?
I think there's two parts of it. Yes, and there's enough complexity there. I'm not sure I want to look at that. But yeah, I think
That's fair.
I suppose it could do switch hackles and everything else, but which I'm guessing is what James was saying that his internal tooling deals with, presumably.
Some of it, yeah. In fact, something I was going to volunteer because I was just thinking about this. We've done something where my team has built some automation that basically is synchronizing neutron security groups from one of our new environments to our internal centralized network ACL system. And the cool thing about that is it gives our network security paranoids like a single place to look to see our overall global network posture. Like we're not creating like a weird little extra thing. But the other cool thing is by doing that, the way that my team did it is that they implement it in such a way that then you can go in and you could look at that neutron security group and you could actually say, you know what, this is actually something I need also applied to a physical firewall to say allow ingress into like some of our legacy networks. So this way, if you need to talk to bare metal machines in our older production environment or our classic or heritage class or provision bare metal environment, you could go to this system and say, oh, you know, allow egress from this cloud environment managed with OpenStack and Neutron, allow that to egress, and then also it applies an ingress rule on the bare metal side to production if you've configured that, or however you've configured your security group rule. So it's like an interesting way of binding kind of the old world and the new world that ties in with the host-based ACL system we have for some bare metal stuff for our bare metal machines, and kind of bringing those two environments together and making sure that our network our security folks have a place to look to kind of understand what are all the traffic flows between our old world or our old stuff and our new stuff. I'll type something on the Etherpad to that effect.
I tried to capture a little bit there, James, but you know, feel free to fix it up there.
Will do, yeah.
It kind of makes me wonder if, because you said that you spoke of your security folks as a completely separate group. And I'm guessing that's probably fairly typical in large organizations with regulatory compliance and separation of duties. So I'm wondering, you know, how does one also, and this is probably another topic that we can come back to later, but how does one actually bridge that divide where there needs to be some ownership or some collaboration there, but it starts getting weird because you also need to automate it.
Yeah, that's I feel like I have a lot of opinions on that subject, but I will say that I think the model of having a separate security group that and then partnering with them closely is something that I think is actually working well for us. It depends on, like, I think a business being willing to fund and support that security group, because I feel like that's something I've seen in a variety of businesses is where they hire the security folks, but they don't empower them to actually drive positive change in the infrastructure.
Right. No, I've seen the same thing as well, James. Yeah. Maybe that's where automation fits in, right? Is, you know, that investment needs to be tied into automation versus, you know, a security team that is more ivory tower-ish or something like that. And that needs to be part of the end-to-end story.
And also the fiscal budget, so that it's conveyed to senior management in some way that makes dollars and cents to them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the most important things is making sure that the senior management understands and buys into the importance of security as an empowered entity within the business. You know, it's and part of that, I think, something that our security folks have started doing is they run classes every year to help teach engineers how to think about security as a default, like how to think about designing secure applications, and they, you know, so secure application design, kind of thinking about like how your architecture works. And then we also have things like red teams who are able to help test applications and actually from an attacker's perspective, as well as things like, you know, fire or incident response teams who are able to respond to anything if there is any kind of detected intrusion attempt.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'll move down. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, I like what you said there about the education and moving it into the development cycle, as in further back with the security thing. That seems to be a thing I'm seeing a lot of people do better at. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people are using security as an excuse to adopt like DevOps style automation. Reason. It's just because you can you start to get more of a change audit trail. And you can sort of prove that there's been peer review of the changes that you've made and that kind of process side. That seems to be a big deal. And I guess I should say that using things like Ironic kind of is a good enabler in that sense, because your hardware deployment starts to use all the same tooling that you can do on the VMs as well, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely.
The idea is to have that layer of isolation, that layer of access control, so that you can ultimately journal those changes and track it. I think one of the conundrums when we start talking about automating all these things is, and it kind of goes to the some organizations create security groups but then don't empower them, is they also want to automate all these things, except you have other teams that tend not to want those things automated, or that want to maintain the spreadsheet process of approval, or the you may only change switch configuration at 3 a.m. on Tuesdays kind of rules. And at some point, it's adherence to the way things have been done for that reason does not make any sense. And it's kind of how to break that mindset and how to embrace that automation to improve your standpoint, how your posture and your standpoint within your infrastructure.
I think what you're saying, Julia, is, you know, part of this is not just a technological change, but a bit of a cultural change within companies and how they operate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would agree with that. Something I kind of want to plug my team here, because something that makes me really proud is when my team actually finds a security problem and they work with the Paranoid team and file a security bug against ourselves. So they notify the team, they notify our paranoids, the paranoids help us track it through. That actually really helps us build a much better relationship with the paranoids, which, by the way, that's the name of our internal security organization, which I love.
I thought you were making that up, but no, that's excellent.
Yeah, they're called the paranoids, and traditionally throughout the organization, they've been separate, and they report higher up in the or they report to a different part of the vertical. And the nice thing is that it makes it so that they actually do have a lot of ability to impact change on the business, right? So if they file a security bug, it's something that has to be remediated. And if you fail to remediate that, that's something that there's a timeline, which are usually shorter than we would prefer, which is fair. That you can't actually go beyond that. You know, once you exceed that, that's something that's tracked up at the senior executive level, and getting an exception for that is actually a pretty big process to get an exception to try and get out of a security bug. And some of these things, it's like, look, this is a reasonable thing. We know that this is a bug. So you have the discussion, you work with the business, they agree that this is an exception. So seeing my team looking for and detecting security problems and actually proactively notifying our security partners and sort of holding ourselves accountable. Whenever I see that, that always makes me smile, because that shows that my team is really committed to security and protecting the business and our users.
That is awesome. I know from my own personal experience that just having those discussions with the security folks builds a lot more trust and a better dialogue, and even helps spawn some collaboration or even consultation, because they're not the subject matter experts on everything. They know, they have their mindset, they have their focus areas, and so they may end up reaching out going, hey, I've got this problem, I need to solve it, help, or what do you think about this? And that just makes a better culture at that point.
Absolutely. All right, well, maybe let's move to line 338 and talk about security monitoring. And we've talked a little bit about some of the tools and processes, but one aspect of networking security is, monitoring what's happening in your network. Do people have a few thoughts on that side of it? Either open source challenges or other partnerships that people would be comfortable sharing? Okay, we got somebody putting something in at 321, so let's maybe go there. I think monitoring, detection, reporting of cloud network controllers. Yeah, so this is very much in the same vein. So I haven't heard of Wazoo, I guess it is, before, but that sounds, it's a great name. But could somebody share a little bit about that tool, whoever wrote that?
Well, I put that in. We're seeing some of our customers starting to use this, although as I understood it, I was more hoping someone else would tell me it does the network for me. It's more to do with the endpoints. It came up in the security SIG in one of a previous event, and I kind of thought nothing of it. And then several customers have started mentioning it also. So it seems to be gaining traction, at least.
Okay, cool.
Which is interesting. And I think it was more that it gives you a set of compliance rules to start with that you can point at that you're following rather than building your own, which seems quite attractive in terms of there's a community building them together. But I was curious if there's anything from the more networking point of view in a similar vein.
I guess one question I had on this vein is, are people using more and more SIEM techniques to monitor their networks and overlays, and are they monitoring network for IDS kind of scenarios? That's certainly something that I would expect to hear.
Yeah, I know some people that do like port link state monitoring with the logging data that comes off their infrastructure. So if they see a port go up or down unexpectedly outside of maintenance window, they tend to start raising alarms and starting investigations. At least as long as it's not a server workload that's a known entity.
Right. And
I think that's probably a thing that gets often overlooked, because that's, even if you have like a store and you have a switch, you can't completely secure that. And what if someone goes and walks and plugs in a Raspberry Pi on a giant battery pack? and kind of scrolls it behind the cabling. Someone may not see that for 6 months.
Right.
Or even worse, a passive tap or some sort of specialized 2-port, 3-port switch.
Okay.
And I guess I know some people are doing kind of the same thing with detecting malicious traffic patterns, where the software that they have, if it detects something, then they start going and investigating it from at least the logging data. I think that really comes down to processes and each individual infrastructure's configuration and layout. I'd love to hear of other people doing things along those lines, or what something like this looks like for them, because everyone's doing these things differently, and without really finding those commonalities, it's really hard to try and drive automation and improvement that everyone can take advantage of.
Has anybody heard of any AI or ML approaches to these kinds of problems? Because it sort of fits that common pattern of, you know, known traffic types. And there's the traditional DDoS protection and intrusion detection approaches as well. So maybe trying to get back to the theme of automation, wondering, you know, how security is interesting, because it started with, you know, I forget who said it, but somebody said, you know, everything's defined in a spreadsheet and needs to be checked. And, you know, the spreadsheet then needs to be approved before anything changes. You know, what are some of the things that we think we need to do to sort of automate those spreadsheets from a technology point of view, and you know, try and enable that transition to a more automated approach to networking security? And where would we start? I guess if we had the challenge in front of us, where would we start?
I've got some ideas, but I want to hear if anyone else does first.
Right, so I have a partial meta comment, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, which is more to do with the lines of responsibilities, which is a bit like what we were saying about the team segregation. So I think we're finding with a lot of customers, they don't necessarily, they're a tenant of a provided edge network link. So actually there's a lot of communication between some other team on what's allowed through there. So like when we're talking about some of the, which is in a sense that some people are consuming as a service, the understanding that there is port scanning going on the network, and, you know, DDoS protections and things outside in the ether between where they happen to be running their cloud. And I suppose the additional thing is we've also seen issues where we're working with a customer that's building like a scientific federation of different clouds in different data centers with different operators. The differences between sites gets really interesting, because in some sites, all your floating IPs are firewalled by default. So it's kind of almost useless until you go and talk to someone. Whereas other sites, they're fairly open until you get told that you're doing something bad by some overarching lord in the distance. There's an automation machine. I'm being slightly flippant, but you know what I mean. So I guess when it comes to automating firewall conversation, it's kind of, yeah, not having to pick up the phone and talk to someone or raise a ticket sounds really cool.
Oh, that's a good comment.
Yeah, it's actually a great observation in my mind, because you're right in that you generally want to avoid that phone call, and depending on how the infrastructure has been set up and how people are operating, and I guess, the original control points that people decided to establish, you end up with these processes, procedures that kind of reflect all of that and have cascaded into the current day, which adds more control points and more processes.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe the key is to kind of unwind the control points, go back to what the original meaning was in those cases, and try and establish a common set that can be worked through and supported.
Yeah, I think I've seen some people do this in by effect almost building two clouds. So you have one that you basically have a part of your cloud which is effectively almost in the DMZ. That has, maybe not the DMZ, I'm probably using the wrong term. It's almost outside, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And another part of the cloud which is considered inside. So they actually partition their workloads between which networks they can live in based on how much, where they are in the network security hierarchy, if you see what I mean. So for the most sensitive workloads, they're more behind a firewall, if that makes sense. So it sort of depends.
I guess maybe I'll throw out a controversial comment just to try and further the discussion. I guess, you know, many organizations could have various control points. So, you know, if we were to try and identify a network security open source project, you know, how would we come up with, you know, a significantly common set of things that we would want to go after? And, you know, that I think that's particularly interesting, is, you know, there's got to be common pain points. You know, there's a few other folks from China Mobile on here. Maybe they have a perspective. Maybe there's other folks that want to weigh in from an operator perspective as well.
Sorry, because now we come from China Mobile's hardware integration team, so we are not familiar with some operation perspective about the security. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all.
Okay.
No, I just,
But
I heard.
let's see you again. Okay.
No, it's very good. I heard some great comments from China Mobile in the previous session. So I thought I'd reach out to you guys to see if there were some thoughts here. Okay. So no problem at all. That's great.
Okay, but we will learn something about the security, and maybe offline we will contact with our security team to get some information, or ask them to connect with you or other guys to review this our Etherpad information. If they want to do some discussion with you, I think we can talk about it offline. Thank you.
Oh, great. That's super. Thank you. I guess maybe let's maybe try and dive deeper into, you know, some more tactical approaches here. You know, there were a few things on the Etherpad when I started adding to it, so I wanted to make sure we address those. So let's maybe talk about automated firewall configuration at a more detailed technical level, starting at line 339. And I'm more familiar with manual ways of firewall configuration, so I can't really offer anything on the automated side, but hopefully others can talk through that.
Does anyone use the Neutron firewall as a service thing? That was a sort of related question.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Maybe that's a no.
Maybe.
Hoping someone would tell me if it's good.
It might just be, it's no for this audience.
That's what I mean, yeah.
All right. Just scrolling up a bit. So let's maybe move on to row 346. Anyone removing edit access to security groups from the OpenStack project admins?
So maybe I can fill in some background on the use case. So at CERN, we have some internal firewalls to segregate off areas like the cryogenics control and beam steering systems. And we're hitting some scalability problems there with the appliances that we've got. And one of the ideas was that we could use security groups, but the project admins themselves should not be allowed to edit them. Only the security team should be allowed to. I don't know if anyone else has things like that, default security groups that cannot be removed from a project.
We've certainly worked with someone that has basically tried to, it creates a custom policy file. So you can have a role that only has access to do the security group stuff, and then basically run that through automation, so the automation bot is the only thing with that rule, apart from like a break glass kind of idea where you just, the admin obviously could assign that role to themselves, but that would be against policy.
Okay, that sounds doable. So basically use the policies framework to then allocate that, remove that right from a project admin. Yes,
effectively. Yeah, it was effectively that. It wasn't so bad in, I was trying to think if there's any gotchas when we were trying that. I think it's not too bad actually in the neutron policy file for that particular rule.
Great, sounds like to do it.
The nice thing now, of course, with policy in code is that you only need to have the overrides in your policy file rather than the whole policy file.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good lead into some of the challenges of managing networking security at scale. You know, the problem becomes much more challenging, you know, than if you're using a very small installation or a multi-site, multi-region kind of installation. Maybe we should double click on some of those challenges. And I think somebody also mentioned, you know, some of the variability in policy between sites as well can cause issues.
It almost feels like there's, at least going back to the prior discussion, prior topic, it feels like there's an opportunity for an enhancement, because it seems like you'd want your admins just to be able to control certain groups and still be able to isolate them from the normal admins. And it feels like it's, by changing the policy file, you're making an all or nothing configuration change.
So you mean having something like system rules and project rules?
I think so. Yeah, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe this is operationally immutable, or
tenant rules.
Yeah.
We have tenants, and that's actually a problem.
I'm assuming your tenants need to be able to have some control over access and security groups, right?
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
We need to, but obviously we don't. I actually had a big argument with one of our security engineers who was testing out the system, and he was like, well, the tenants can break out of their VM and possibly get into our private backend systems. And I said, okay, well, here's the test that you're going to do. You're going to stand up a VM, you're going to open it up wide and try to break through and see what happens. But it took me 2 weeks to convince him to do this test, which, by the way, the system passed, thank God.
Maybe we should check, Julia, you were describing So you're basically saying that there's some projects that would be locked down, but admin would still be able to change it in other projects. Was that what you were saying? Oh, I think you muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Maybe I'm feeling like changing the policy file is kind of like a giant hammer.
I agree with that.
It feels like there needs to be a little more granularity there to be able to lock down a group and say only this user or only these set of users can touch this thing, and somehow apply policy to that individual object.
Right, but you need some kind of federated thing that says, okay, this high level admin thing can't be touched, but except by this, special group. But then things underneath don't have to go back to that file every time. So we need a sense of delegation, right? More granularity.
I mean, so it does work. It works not as badly as it first sounds, in the sense that it is a role. So it's only users with that role that then have access to that within their project only.
Yes, that's how you would implement it.
Yeah, that's certainly how it works when you modify the policy file. So you just introduce a new custom role that those users that have extra privilege have, and then you can, if you want.
But we don't want
roles.
our tenants to even see that policy file at all.
Oh no, you don't see the policy file, I don't think. Certainly tenants don't see policy files. They're global in the config and hidden away.
That's as it should.
Which actually is a problem.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
We never have fixed that one. So there's a thing with Horizon. You kind of sometimes have to tell Horizon your policy, otherwise it gets confused. But let's gloss over that.
All right. Well, let's maybe move forward. We've got about 15-20 minutes left. I haven't found a good poll to launch yet, but we'll see if we can get one rolling here at some point. I guess for automated security monitoring, are there tools or projects that we would want to highlight to new people in the community who are interested in networking security? Projects or things that people find interesting in the wider ecosystem that we should pay attention to, and then are there other potentially cross-project things that we should be thinking about? So that's where I thought we could take this piece of the conversation. I know there's some very knowledgeable OpenStack people on the call here, so maybe let's start with some OpenStack specific things that we would want to highlight that people may or may not be aware of.
What line number are we on again?
Oh, I'm sorry, line 368.
All right, thank you.
So we've talked a bit about neutron security groups.
Wondering for 368 for like some of the tools, like I know there's things like CrowdStrike, Nessus. Is there anything else that anyone runs like that?
I mean, I kind of think of the same tools that you would run in if you were to build a completely physical data center and hand install all the machines and manage all the networking manually, is kind of being the same thing I would use inside a cloud. Maybe with some of the approaches tuned a little bit.
Those two I've seen, I guess, some other scanning tools. There's certainly automated scanning tools that people are running. Nessus for sure. OpenSCAP is more of a host level thing, but does have some networking things if I remember correctly. guess moving on to row 382, I'm wondering if there's automation frameworks that people are using as a foundation to build networking security policy or even audit various pieces of their network. So I'm thinking things like either Puppet or Ansible, where people could be either deploying and managing policy or again doing other things that maybe people hadn't anticipated. So wanted to throw that out there. And more, declarative approaches versus imperative.
I am aware, well, my wife does use or has been using a tool for basically more auditing and accounting purposes in her security department. I think it's a commercial tool. It's not open source.
Right.
And I think it also pulls in some of the community published data that allows them to create control points and figure out their processes as a result. I guess I'm not aware of any open source tools that are doing this.
Yeah, I would agree with you that these are done. I think a lot of what we're doing has been homegrown.
So that those kinds of data points actually point to an opportunity for a new open source project that could actually tackle this problem.
Absolutely. She just responded back with a couple of tools they're using, and one that seems to really, I keep hearing in other discussions with folks, is Splunk Phantom.
Did I capture that right, Julie?
Yeah, I think it's Splunk bought Phantom at some point, and that seems to be I keep hearing of that one all over the place these days. So there must be some popularity there in commercial software circles.
It's Phantom. I'm looking it up right now. It's Phantom. Yeah.
All right, well, maybe I'm going to put the foundation folks on the spot here, and let's maybe do a poll and see what would this, a simple yes, no, do we see, based on the conversation this morning, do we see an interesting opportunity for a new open source project that would focus on automating network security? Let's try that out, and we can maybe get a little bit of data from that as we exit this part of the session this morning. Sorry to put you guys on the spot there, but are there some instructions we want to share with the people on the call? It looks like we've got 65 people on, so that's a pretty good number of folks.
It'll just take us a couple minutes to get it loaded in.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Beyond a kind of a yes, no, would this be an interesting open source project? I guess kind of also collaborating on at least identifying a set of control points, and maybe that has to be separated by industry, because I know when you think about it, when I built data centers, a lot of my control points were derived by base industry compliance rules, and then not court orders, but client contracts and their contracts and their regulatory requirements, which required digging back a couple layers. Wow, only occasionally there was a court order involved.
Generally, you don't see court orders. Generally, you see, HIPAA, PCI, certifications and regulations.
Yeah, in my case, it was a litigation services firm, so there were court orders.
Oh, yeah, but that's unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, outside, at least outside of the litigation world.
Right. So HIPAA is regulatory. So FERPA, HIPAA, what's the bunch of federal things too.
Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yeah. Well, that I was thinking some of the we call it GCM, but it's got another name. We have internal acronyms for for these things.
There's also, I remember at some point, SSAE, I think 16 originally, was starting to head in some direction because it wanted to ensure you had certain control points, or even just a general vague idea of a control point.
But what my point is that it kind of falls into regulatory requirements and then requirements that are driven by industry groups, PCI being the most common one that you see, but there are others. The utilities industry in particular is just totally security crazy, and the financial industry as well.
Having read some of the documentation guidelines on how to do central office grounding, I can believe it.
Yeah. Well, the truth is that our electrical grid is actually quite hackable, and they know it.
Well, thanks to the community folks, the poll is up if people haven't seen it on the Zoom browser, and sorry to interject on that good dialogue.
It looks so far
Beth
to
and
be
Julia.
quite positive, yeah.
Yeah, pretty positive so far. All right, well, we'll let that run in the background for a couple minutes and we'll see how far we get so people can chime in here. And there's some good updates going into the Etherpad here on various standards and control points that people are calling out. So that's great. Thank you for people chiming in here on the Etherpad. Are there topics people would like to cover that weren't explicitly listed on the Etherpad that haven't come up, or things that you feel like you would like to bring up that we haven't explicitly covered? We've got about 12 or 14 minutes left in this particular part of the agenda, and certainly welcome to throw it out very broadly here in terms of what people would like to cover in the last few minutes, or we can end a bit early as well.
Somebody else got GDPR. Yeah. GDPR is pretty specific. I mean, it gets down to the IP addresses. So that's always the one that throws me for a loop, because, mostly we don't necessarily capture any other information about the customer, but, I'll pretty much guarantee we know their IP addresses.
All right, and maybe we're going to end the poll here in about 30 seconds. So we've got about 20 of the 55 people who are online who've chimed in. So thanks folks. I guess we've listed a number of control points here. Are there some that we would prioritize, or where would we focus in on this? Because that would probably be one of the things that a new project would need to look at.
They feel like someone would have to go through and create like a bit of a Venn diagram
Yeah.
Because there's definitely a lot of overlap in the specific areas. Like I've gone through the American Independent, basically the American Independent Accountants, Certified Public Accountants Association's SSAE process before, and it reached into basically any type of control that you could possibly have, and then as a result, an auditing report got generated by an independent auditing firm, and we could hand that to partners and customers, and they be assured that we have processes, but it delves so deep into systems that just like there were definitely overlaps with other areas.
Yeah. Well, so Julia, the issue is that a lot of the regulatory requirements overlap with the technical solutions, because remember, if you read HIPAA, it doesn't tell you the technical solution. It just says, and I teach security, and I always argue with my students about this, because they're always like, oh no, you have to like set the, what's the technical solution? I'm like, no, the policy is, this is the requirements of what data you need to protect, and it's up to you to figure out how to protect it.
Absolutely, and where I was thinking with like SSAE was that they have general suggestions that they publish as basic control points you should probably have, and then basic guidelines for auditors that are going through organizations' policies and procedures, things to look for, not necessarily technical solutions, but concepts, general ideas, and also warning signs, things that just you probably don't want to see.
Right. But there's no reason why the open source community can't build something to those requirements.
Oh, no, there's nothing preventing it. And you could use all open source under the hood to meet it. It's much more making sure that you have some way to address the control point that they want to see. Whatever that control point and whatever that mechanism is.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We've closed the poll here. I'll share the results. It's overwhelmingly positive. So 80%, 85% of people are saying that this is a good area to focus a new open source project. So interesting data point for all of us who are passionate about open source. I'll put out one more call here for any other topics or areas that you would have liked to have taken the conversation that I haven't, and please chime in, and and if not, just got a couple of closing comments, and I see some folks writing on the Etherpad, so that's great. So I don't want to cut anybody off here.
I have a self-serving comment.
Sure.
We're actually, our internal security team, the Paranoids, they're hiring a dedicated OpenStack engineer.
Yay!
If you know anyone that's looking, this would be awesome. So I won't go on and on.
I'm so glad to hear that, James, because I have had many arguments with those guys about OpenStack.
Yeah. So this will be good.
That's great.
Probably, I don't know if I should put the link in the Etherpad, but otherwise I put it up on my Twitter. Pretty easy to find.
Okay,
there, so.
Perfect. I'm sure there's a few of us hiring in this space for sure. It's a very important space and tough to find experienced people for sure.
Right.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. It was very enjoyable experience for me. This is the first time I've moderated a virtual session like this, so I think it's really good to double click into these kinds of topics and use the virtual tools that we have at our disposal in these challenging times. And it's always better to get together face to face, but maybe this has been a bigger opportunity for people to contribute without having to travel. So I'd like to thank the foundation for putting this together, and thank you everybody for your participation. And with that, I'll throw it back to the foundation team to move us on with the rest of the agenda.